series on safe sleep. And today I'm going to talk about whether you should be scared of SIDS or not. And I know that SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome, is sort of a very scary topic for new parents with young babies. And it is something that is on top of mind when you bring your baby home, when you are thinking about where your baby is going to sleep, and also in the middle of the night when you're up with your baby, feeding your baby, and worrying that somehow you're going to kill your baby because of SIDS. And to be quite honest, this is something that our society is sort of fear mongering parents with. And I'm here because I want to talk a little bit about why, yes, of course, SIDS is something that we need to be really conscious of, but it's also not something to be deathly afraid of. And it's not something that we need to be scaring new parents with all the time. Okay. So, if you don't know, sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, is defined as the unexplained death of an infant under 12 months of age. SIDS is thought to occur in a very small percentage of the population, actually, and is resulting from an overlap of three different factors. Factor number one, a baby is born vulnerable already. There is something going on with their respiratory system, even at birth. Baby is 0 to 6 months of age, and there is a stressor that is introduced. And a stressor is something like daycare transitions to sleeping in their own room, or perhaps another sort of major change in their lives, as well as unsafe sleeping arrangements. And we'll talk about safe sleep and what that looks like and some of the factors that you need to look or think about in terms of a safe sleep arrangement in part two. But today is really going to be focused on SIDS. So our society has not yet figured out how to identify which babies are born vulnerable. However, prematurity is one factor that has sort of increases the risk. It's also believed that there is a genetic vulnerability that affects breathing or arousal area in the brainstem. So some of these things you can't actually control, okay? So this is, again, SIDS. Now, the incidence of SIDS risk is highest from 0 to 4 months. And it usually peaks around 2 to 3 months of age, and then it sort of tapers off after 6 months of age, with only about 2% of SIDS cases occurring in the 9 to 12 months of age. And so this is really important for you to be aware of, because I feel like there is a lot of scare and fear put into new parents that, oh, you should not have anything in the crib in the first 1 to 2 years of life because, oh my goodness, you're going to cause SIDS for your baby. And so, yes, that is true to a certain extent. However, if you're using common sense, if you are following safe sleep guidelines, then it's not something that you need to be too worried about once that huge risk period is over. Of course, the loss of SIDS, or the loss of a baby or child to SIDS, is terrible. And it's a huge tragedy, a tragedy. And of course, that's often made worse by this assumption that parents are at fault for some reason, even if they have followed safe sleep guidelines. And the thing is, I want you to remember that true SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, is actually a very, very small percentage of the population. And babies are born vulnerable for the most part, okay? Now, this is often confused with or lumped together with other causes of infant death, and they often all get lumped under the SIDS category. But actually, there is something called accidental suffocation or strangulation in bed, which is ASSB, or something called sudden unexpected infant death, which is SUID. So those two things are very different than sudden infant death syndrome, okay? But they're often all lumped into SIDS. And often the accidental suffocation or strangulation in bed, or the sudden unexpected infant death, those are caused by unsafe sleep environments, and largely those are more preventable, okay? So a lot of babies in the research that they have died from a blanket covering their head or a pillow or parents sleeping on a couch and then the baby kind of rolling off into the sort of the space in between the couch and the parent, um, and they kind of become entrapped. It's also been shown to be caused by intoxicated caregivers. So people that have parents that have taken sedative sort of medications, alcohol, recreational drugs that often make them not as responsive. Um, and then also these ASSB and SUID, a lot of sleep products potentially, right? So products for cribs and adult beds that are not designed with infant sleep safety in mind and can potentially cause suffocation or strangulation. So this is why we really need to take precaution and be aware of having and creating a safe sleep environment so that we can avoid this accidental strangulation and suffocation in bed symptom, right? Or thing. Um, and so I really want you to think about that. I'm sure that you've probably heard that bed sharing is dangerous because that is another thing that our society fearmongers. And so we're going to talk about that in part two when we talk about the safe sleep situation and safe sleep sort of environment, how to create a safe sleep environment, even if you never plan to bed share with your child, because more often than not, it happens unexpectedly. Okay. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted to share a little bit more about this whole SIDS dialogue because true SIDS is actually a small percentage of the population. What we need to really be worried about is this accidental strangulation or suffocation. And so, this is why we really need to make sure that we're using common sense and we're being very mindful of where we're putting our babies to sleep and what we have around them in their sleep surface, which we'll talk about in part two. That's it for today. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys soon.